When I moved into my countryside property, I knew one thing for certain. My land was mine, and I intended to keep it that way. Years of saving had gone into purchasing a secluded piece of acreage, tucked away behind rolling hills and a tree-lined road. The land came with a house that needed work, but its most important feature was the long gravel driveway leading to a heavy steel gate I had installed shortly after moving in. That gate symbolized security, privacy, and most importantly, boundaries. It wasn't long before the local homeowners association took notice. Though my land technically fell just outside their managed neighborhood, the HOA officers acted as if they owned every blade of grass in the area. They began to complain that my gate blocked a community shortcut they had long been using to access the back of their subdivision. What they called a shortcut, I called trespassing. For years, neighbors had cut through the property before I owned it, but I had put a stop to that the moment I arrived. The HOA board decided they wanted that path reopened. They claimed it was part of an easement, though their documents had no legal standing on my deed. They started sending letters, slipping notices under my gate, and even standing outside with clipboards, glaring at the locked entrance as if they had authority. To them, I was being unreasonable. To me, they were invaders trying to establish control over something that was never theirs. The first confrontation came when several board members marched up the driveway one afternoon, demanding I open the gate and allow them through. They insisted they had rights, that I couldn't simply block their access, that the community came first. But I knew better. The papers I signed when I purchased the land gave me full ownership, no conditions, no shared access. Their so-called authority ended at their neighborhood's border. My gate stood firm, and so did I. That was the day the battle lines were drawn. The HOA wasn't just asking anymore. They were preparing to fight, and they had no idea how far I was willing to go to defend my property. The weeks that followed turned my quiet countryside home into a frontline fortress. The HOA officers seemed to take my refusal as a personal insult. They doubled their efforts, holding meetings where my name was mentioned as though I were a criminal. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, warning neighbors that my locked gate was endangering the community by cutting off emergency access. They tried to paint me as selfish, reckless, even dangerous. But their campaign didn't stop at words. Soon they began testing boundaries in more physical ways. Twice I found fresh tire tracks in the grass near the edge of my fence line, proof that someone had tried to find another way onto my land. One night, I caught two men from the HOA walking along the perimeter with flashlights, scouting for weaknesses in my fencing. When I approached them, they scurried away like guilty children. It was clear they wanted access, no matter what the law said. They even involved county officials, filing complaints about my gate. They claimed it was a safety hazard, that it blocked potential fire trucks or ambulances. But when inspectors came, they found my gate in full compliance with code. It was outfitted with an emergency lockbox just like county regulations required. Their attempt to use the system against me had failed. Still, the HOA officers didn't back down. Frustration grew among them, and their behavior became more aggressive. At one point, they staged a protest outside my property. A group of board members stood just beyond the gate with signs, shouting about community rights. They hoped to pressure me into compliance through embarrassment, but I didn't budge. I had invested too much to let a power-hungry HOA dictate what happened on my own land. Their persistence, however, was wearing thin. The situation was no longer about convenience. It had become about control, and if they couldn't get it through paperwork or pressure, I suspected they might try something much bolder. The battle wasn't slowing down. It was escalating. The inevitable happened on a gray morning, when I noticed several HOA officers gathered near the gate with tools in hand. They weren't there to protest or argue this time. They were there to dismantle it. Bolt cutters, crowbars, even a portable saw had been brought to the scene. They were determined to break through my barrier and reclaim what they believed belonged to them. I watched from a distance as they debated how to attack the gate, each man puffed up with self-importance. To them, this wasn't vandalism or trespassing. It was restoring community rights. But to me, it was a blatant violation of my property. I stepped forward and reminded them they were on private land, their actions illegal. For a brief moment, they hesitated, glancing at one another. Yet arrogance won out, and they pressed on. That was when I made my move. I had already contacted local law enforcement days earlier, warning them of the HOA's threats. As the officers began tampering with the gate, the sheriff's deputies pulled up behind them, lights flashing. The scene quickly turned chaotic. HOA board members stammered, claiming they were within their rights. But the deputies weren't buying it. The bolt cutters and saw told a different story. Each man was reminded of the laws they were breaking: trespassing, attempted property damage, and obstruction. The sheriff made it clear. This wasn't their land. They had no jurisdiction. and their HOA rules meant nothing beyond their neighborhood borders. Some of them tried to argue, but the deputies stood firm, ordering them to leave immediately. The attempted breach had backfired spectacularly. Instead of regaining access, the HOA had exposed themselves as bullies willing to commit crimes. As their small group dispersed in shame, I felt a surge of vindication. But I also knew this wasn't the end. People like them didn't simply back off after humiliation. They would regroup, re-strategize, and come back with new tactics. The sheriff's warning may have protected my gate for now, but it also escalated the war. The HOA had been humiliated publicly, and they wouldn't take that lightly. The battle was far from over. Humiliated at my gate, the HOA shifted their strategy. No longer relying on physical attempts, they turned to the courtroom. I soon received a thick envelope containing a lawsuit. The HOA board was claiming that my property blocked a long-standing right-of-way for the community, a claim they now tried to back with fabricated documents and manipulated testimonies. Reading the paperwork, I saw how carefully they had crafted their trap. They painted me as an outsider, a stubborn landowner who refused to cooperate with the greater good. They included affidavits from neighbors, some of whom had enjoyed crossing my land for years before I arrived. Their lawyers were slick, presenting half-truths as facts. For them, this wasn't about law. It was about intimidation. But what they didn't realize was that I had prepared for this possibility from the start. Before buying the land, I had researched every inch of its history, every easement, every legal record. My title was clear. No right-of-way existed, and no HOA could invent one. I hired an attorney, armed him with every document, every deed, every survey proving my ownership was absolute. When the court date arrived, the HOA came dressed in confidence, certain they would crush me with legal force. But as their arguments unfolded, my attorney dismantled them one by one. He exposed their documents as irrelevant, their claims unsupported, their case hollow. The judge, unimpressed by their theatrics, dismissed their lawsuit with a stern warning about wasting court resources. It was a devastating loss for the HOA. Their attempt to bend the law had not only failed, but left them with mounting legal fees and damaged credibility. Their arrogance had blinded them to the reality that my land was never theirs to control. For the first time, I sensed they were truly shaken. Yet even in defeat, I doubted they were finished. People obsessed with power rarely quit after losing. They simply looked for another angle, another way to strike. The gate still stood, unbroken, but the war had only deepened. With the courtroom battle lost, the HOA turned to more underhanded tactics. They knew they couldn't force me legally, but they could try to make my life miserable. Soon, I began noticing small but deliberate acts of sabotage. My mailbox was pried open, leaving my letters scattered in the dirt. Trash mysteriously appeared on my property, as if dumped to remind me that I was unwelcome. Even my security cameras were tampered with once, their wires cut in the night. It was a campaign of harassment, subtle enough to avoid legal repercussions, but persistent enough to wear me down. Neighbors whispered about me in grocery stores, fueled by rumors the HOA spread. Some stopped waving when I passed by, convinced I was the villain blocking community progress. Their strategy was clear: isolate me, intimidate me, and force me into compliance by sheer exhaustion. But instead of breaking me, it only fueled my resolve. I upgraded my security system, installed motion-activated floodlights, and worked with the sheriff's office to document every incident. If they wanted a war of attrition, I was ready. The tension reached a boiling point when one of the board members, frustrated by months of failure, confronted me directly on the roadside. He threatened that the HOA wouldn't stop until I gave in. What he didn't realize was that his words, caught on camera, became my strongest weapon yet. With evidence of their harassment, the sheriff's office issued warnings that the HOA could not ignore. The harassment slowed, but I could tell their resentment only grew deeper. They had tried intimidation, sabotage, and legal force, all without success. My gate still stood. My property was still mine. And now, the HOA was running out of options. The storm was finally reaching its climax. The HOA's war reached its breaking point on a summer afternoon when the board held a large gathering at the entrance of their subdivision. Determined to rally support, they framed the issue as a final stand for community rights. They marched toward my property in a show of strength, dozens of members following their leaders to my gate. But this time, I was ready in more ways than one. Not only had I fortified my property and prepared legally, but I had also gained the quiet support of residents who were tired of the HOA's obsession with control. Many had seen how far their leaders had gone, and sympathy was shifting in my direction. As the crowd reached my gate, The sheriff's department was already waiting, alerted to the planned demonstration. The officers reminded the group once again that my land was private, that the HOA had no authority here, and that any attempt to breach the gate would result in arrests. The crowd, emboldened at first, quickly began to thin as reality set in. What was meant to be a display of power turned into a display of futility. One by one, people left, until only a few stubborn board members remained. They were given a final warning: back down or face charges. With no options left, they retreated in silence, their campaign against me effectively broken. The war was over. The HOA had thrown everything they had at me: pressure, sabotage, lawsuits, even attempted force, and failed at every turn. My gate still stood, a symbol of the battle I had fought and won. From that day forward, the HOA never bothered me again. They had wasted too much money, too much energy, and too much credibility chasing a fight they could never win. The neighbors who once doubted me eventually realized I had been right all along. The property was mine, the gate was mine, and the rules were mine. In the end, it wasn't just about keeping people off my land. It was about standing firm when bullies tried to take what wasn't theirs. And no matter how much pressure they applied, one truth never changed: my property, my rules, and I never backed down.